Hello, everybody. My name's James. Welcome to Planet FPL. And on this podcast today, I'll shortly be discussing events at the Club World Cup over the last week and looking forward to the quarterfinals, which all four quarterfinals will feature players who were teammates of Diogo Jota. This podcast was originally meant to be released yesterday. That didn't feel appropriate under the circumstances of the tragic news of the passing of Diogo Jota and his brother Andre Silva yesterday. Before I talk Club World Cup matters, I'd like to pay my own small tribute and try, if I can, to speak about Jota. First and foremost, obviously, my condolences to family and friends and everyone associated to Jota and Silva. The heartbreaking news of Jota getting married within the last couple of weeks to his childhood sweetheart, leaves behind three children. Like, it's devastating for the family, obviously, first and foremost, and their privacy must be respected. I did somewhat consider potentially using some of the statements in this piece, some incredible pieces released by people at Liverpool yesterday, including Andrew Robertson and Arne Slot and others as well. I don't think I could have had the heart to read any of them out, truthfully. So I can only pay my own little small amount of respects. Some of the messaging come out yesterday, I think, shows how much Jota was adored as a person, a teammate, as a colleague. Many of the messages yesterday didn't reference football. They very much referenced the man and the friend that many people, particularly at Liverpool, obviously felt Jota was. I can't speak about the man, unfortunately, obviously didn't know him, but I think in our public eye, Jota's been in our psyche for those of us who follow the Premier League for 7 years now. He's passed at the age of 28, his brother at only 26. And Jota's been in our psyche, in our minds for 7 years, since many of us saw him for the first time in the Premier League for Wolves, and those who followed the Championship would have known him from a year earlier. They'd briefly, the two brothers, been together at FC Porto. Silva had a career that took him into the Portuguese second division. Jota moved to Wolves when they were still a championship club. And as I said, many of us would have seen him in the Premier League for the first time then. More as a left winger. Many of us saw him later play several different positions for Liverpool, including up front. When I think of Jota, the footballer, the first thing that comes to mind is goals against Arsenal. That's what I remember as a positive memory. I remember the two goals in the League Cup semi-final at the Emirates being particularly important. So there's probably Jota goals that I very much celebrated. He very much did my own team, Tottenham, over as well. When Tottenham had come back from 3-0 down at Anfield a year later in 2023 to get back to 3-3. Only moments later, the ball fell to Jota, and I knew that he'd score before it had happened. He was an exquisite finisher. Very good in the air for someone who was small. He was one of the best headers of the ball, I think, actually in the Premier League. His movement was excellent. He could play multiple positions across the front. But Sid primarily played on the left, really, for Wolves. Remember that trio of attackers with Raul Jimenez and Adama Traore. She saw a video that was circulating yesterday from Jeff Shee, the owner at Wolves, who spoke of his regret of selling Jota, wished it had never happened, and that's obviously very understandable. I did check in terms of Jota's goals against Arsenal. He scored 8 actually against them in his career. That wasn't the team that he scored against the most. That was actually Leicester City. He scored 9 against them, which included a hat-trick for Wolves, a period when he'd actually only scored 2 Premier League goals. He scored a hat-trick, including a last-minute winner in a game that Wolves won 4-3. And that wasn't his only hat-trick for Wolves. There's plenty at Molineux will remember with fondness back-to-back hat-tricks when they got into Europa League for the first time. They played European football for the first time since the early 1980s. He got hat-tricks against Besiktas and Espanyol, including one of them as a substitute in 13 minutes. Wolves fans, I think, will also remember with fondness his tigerish attitude. As said, watching him develop as a young player who, when Wolves were promoted, no one would actually be certain if he'd definitively be a first choice player. He went on and scored many more important goals for Wolves, including an FA Cup quarter-final against Manchester United that took Wolves to Wembley. When he moved to Liverpool, I don't think anybody was truly sure that if he would actually be good enough to play for a team at that time were, remember, Premier League champions. He joined Liverpool during the period of COVID And I think Jota was always came across as a very likable footballer. You could see traits in him that you'd identify with. He wasn't the biggest, but had this, like I said, almost tigerish strength and will in his play. He was a winner. And I think that's why he proved to be successful at Liverpool and stayed at the club for so long and was so successful. Obviously, he did have injury issues that very much interrupted much of his career, but he became an important and valued member of that Liverpool team. Even in the last season, he scored several important goals despite missing big parts of the season because of injury. He picked up a really bad rib injury against Chelsea quite early in the season. I'd actually captained him in FPL that day. I captained him twice in FPL last season because I trusted him. I knew the ability of the player that he was and what he could be. And he really suited Liverpool. I think in reflection, he probably would have played a lot more last season, obviously bar the injuries, but I think he would have been first choice for Liverpool throughout. We saw very early in the season that Slot trusted him to drop in from the nine position and drop in shorter into midfield areas and link the play that so well enabled the likes of Mo Salah to push on and achieve his incredible goal scoring feats that he did last season. But as said, even despite missing large chunks of the season, there was many important goals for Jota. He scored the only goal in a 1-0 victory at Crystal Palace early in the campaign. He's got a very important equaliser at Nottingham Forest moments after coming on as a substitute. And his final goal, fittingly for Liverpool, was in a 1-0 victory against Everton in a Merseyside derby, which was so typical of Jota. He had this incredible dribbling ability of close control that he'd almost run through people. He wasn't someone that like pushed past someone and beat people on the outside. He didn't have like amazing skill. He used to run through people. I remember a great assist he got in one of the last games that I was at before COVID, playing for Wolves at White Hart Lane, where he'd pick the ball up on the left and he beat several players almost just by running through them before creating a brilliant assist for Raul Jimenez. And that goal against Everton was so typical of him, that ability of close control and then composure in the final important moments. He also, in his final game, lifted a trophy for Portugal. He'd made just under 50 appearances for his home nation, and they obviously won the Nations League. He appeared as a substitute in the final in Munich against Spain, and of course, won the title fittingly with Liverpool. Bought in 2020, number 20, delivering Liverpool's 20th title. Felt obviously so fitting. My condolences, particularly to the supporters of not just Liverpool, Wolves, and his other former clubs who clearly hold him in such high regard. And I think the football community has been very much shocked by what's happened. We are used to seeing heroes and people we admire pass, of course, but we certainly don't expect it, unfortunately, in such shocking circumstances when individuals such as Jota and his brother Silva are obviously at such a young age, the prime of their careers, unfortunately, and sadly they've been lost. That's my small little part on Diogo Jota. There's nothing I can say to do justice, but may they both rest in peace. It feels like quite some time ago since the last 16 matches in the Club World Cup began. I missed the first half of the first game between Palmeiras and Botafogo on Saturday, was out with family, but got back in time for the second half of the game still goalless. And the game was on DAZN, which many of you might have been watching games on who have been offering games via a free service. You can upgrade to premium and ultra HD coverage by giving them the sum of I don't know how much, because DAZN, you're not going to get my money. I wouldn't pay 50p a month for it personally unless it involved my own club. So quite happy with the free version, but it was very interesting to know that DAZN had certainly doubled down with the amount of ads that they were showing during games. Many of us may have seen this bar going across the screen that just keeps popping up every 5-10 minutes or so. But during the second half of this particular game, it had obviously been ramped up massively, where they were showing ads advertising other events they were doing whenever there was like a break in play. Slightly strange, but yeah, you're not getting my money, DAZN, sorry. The game was won by a goal from substitute Paulinho for Palmeiras. Wasn't fully fit and was actually withdrawn in extra time. That's when obviously the goal was scored. Abel Ferreira's side will have to do without a couple of really important players for their game against Chelsea. Gustavo Gomez was sent off centre back for 2 yellow cards in the game. He'll obviously miss the tie against Chelsea, and so too will left back Joaquin Picares. Botafogo, who'd obviously been doing quite well in Brazil, won the title, I think, the year before. Not good enough, however, for our famous friend John Textor. Many of our patrons will be familiar with us talking about Textor on our Money and Football podcast in relation to Crystal Palace and Leon. He had a very busy week. He sacked Renato Paiva, Botafogo's manager, after the game. Yeah, beating PSG in the last 16 and getting in the group stage, sorry, and getting through probably the group of death. Not enough to save him from his job. They obviously lost this all Brazilian tie. Much of the attention going into the quarterfinal with Chelsea will surround obviously William Esteval, who obviously is going to go and join Chelsea immediately at the conclusion of this tournament, apparently, or as soon as Palmeiras go out. I don't know if he's going to be unveiled in a Chelsea shirt on the side of the pitch if Chelsea win tonight. Esteval played on the left in the game at the weekend, unusual position for him, not quite comfortable. He's a player who wants to come in and cut inside on his left foot, and not so comfortable on the left hand side. Ferreira explained it away by saying that him and Pava have had many tactical duels, so he wanted to surprise, and I think it led into kind of a cat and mouse football match where the two sides did cancel themselves out quite a lot. But bookies got it right. Palmeiras were favourites, and they advanced to that tie against Chelsea. Chelsea obviously saw off Benfica very, very late in the day. You might remember at the end of the group stage review, I had said it might end up being a long night for you because thunderstorms are predicted. Now, I'd been watching England's under 21s claim success against Germany in the final in Slovakia, so didn't watch this. But quickly switched over when I saw there was still 5 minutes remaining for the Benfica Chelsea game, with Chelsea leading 1-0. Got Benfica goalkeeper Anthony Trubin not covering himself in too much glory on Reece James' opener, and certainly didn't in the second either, in extra time, which led to Christopher Nkunku's goal. Now, the game had 5 minutes left to go, and I didn't see any of it because the players were withdrawn again, as we've seen several times in this tournament, due to concerns about weather conditions and local storms. I stayed up for a further hour and a half to watch the last 5 minutes of the game and then gave up. So it was somewhat of a shock when I woke the next morning to find that Chelsea had won 4-1 after extra time. Angel Di Maria equalised with a penalty after an unfortunate handball decision against Malo Gusto, but unfortunately once VAR was involved, it was a decision likely to be given, I think, very, very harsh. So the game turned. The interval in the game meant that Benfica could plot a strategy to try and equalise in those final 5 minutes plus added time. And it was quite evident from the start of that period that there was every chance suddenly that Benfica would do so. For 85 minutes, they barely threatened Chelsea's goal, but obviously got that equaliser. It changed the game. But then the game would change again after Gianluca Prestiani's red card early in extra time. Chelsea would go on and win handsomely, which included another goal for Pedro Neto. Cole Palmer, another unusually seen on the left. Now, we've seen a tactical tweak in the game for Chelsea against Flamengo, where Maresca very much referenced after the game that he had next year in mind in terms of his tactics. Palmer presumably isn't going to play on the left regularly, but it was something that we saw again in this game. We know where Cole Palmer wants to operate, but it does appear that with Caicedo and Lavia available, there is a will to try and get Enzo Fernandez into greater central attacking areas where he can be a threat and is more of a box crasher than, say, Cole Palmer, who's more of a creative hub. I think the problem that Chelsea have a little bit at the moment, which is why the interest is obviously there in Bino Gittins, is that Chelsea's best operators in terms of moving people to the wide area are probably best off the right. Neto's probably best on the right. Madueke best on the right. Palmer, if he was playing wide, best from the right. Whereas obviously Jadon Sancho was happy to operate on the left. It's obviously gone back to Manchester United. Mykhailo Mudryk, better on the left. Not available for obvious reasons. Raheem Sterling, I presume, won't be used for Chelsea next year and will probably move on somewhere else. So I do understand the will to buy a player to go and play on the left-hand side. But I don't think we should rule out Palmer operating in these areas again. And I did read one interesting piece about where Chelsea had scored a lot of their goals last year was so evidently leaned towards balls coming into the box on the right-hand side rather than the left. So I think a little bit of the theory is with Palmer out there, got a dual threat where you've got more creativity coming from the left-hand side. Don't like him there. Spent a lot of time last year speaking about Palmer in left half spaces and right half spaces. It's definitely for me from the right where he's most dangerous, but we might see more of this going forward. A note on obviously the stoppage. The game took 4 hours and 38 minutes from its start time to complete. I was in bed by the time it had completed. Enzo Maresca described the delay as a joke. It is clearly not ideal, particularly with a short stoppage like that. We've seen games where players have gone off at half time, and you can understand that a lot better. With 5 minutes to go, I'm sure the will ideally would have been to finish the game. Now, of course, player and fan safety is obviously paramount and has to come first. It's hugely frustrating. I don't know about you, but if you've played 90 minutes of football, your legs kind of tend to seize up a little bit a little while afterwards, after the adrenaline has kind of run out of your body. Must be incredibly difficult for players to then prep for a final 5 minutes that then ultimately then becomes for many a final 40 minutes, basically. So I have every sympathy with that. It's not an ideal solution. There are going to be further problems next year, you would imagine. Though I would note that MetLife Stadium, where this game was played, is the only stadium so far that suffered a weather delay that's actually being used at the World Cup next year. But many are obviously countering at the moment with requests that games are played at certain times. FIFA Pro want to get rid of the 12 p.m. kickoffs. I'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end. Jurgen Klopp had a quote that came out the following day saying, and I'll quote, that the Club World Cup was the worst idea ever implemented in football. Now, that was in reference to player welfare and players playing too much football. I think many can see that and would probably agree with it. We need much larger squads for those at the top level of football to compete. I documented in one of the earlier podcasts about even the amount of football that even the Brazilian teams were playing. But for many of the top European sides, let's be honest, they're there because of the money, aren't they? Sky's Carve Solical completely misread the room, telling Klopp not to watch the tournament if he didn't want to watch it. I think Klopp's concerns were very much about player welfare, something that Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola would back up the next day as well. On Sunday, PSG handsomely beat Inter Miami 4-0 in Atlanta. Inter Miami's manager Javier Mascherano described the first half as kind of like a bloodbath. They were absolutely well and truly beaten. I think if PSG didn't have to think about bigger fish to fry in forthcoming games, this could have ended up being quite a silly score. What can the MLS teams do differently? Well, I think it's a positive for them that Inter Miami, in particular with Messi, obviously made it out of the group, though I think they were in quite a weak section in Group A. An interesting note on Miami and MLS clubs. I note that the average salary, as reported in the Athletic, for the four non-Barcelona players at Inter Miami is £5,000 per week. Those players that formerly played for Barcelona are obviously going to be on a lot more money. Messi, by the way, is out of contract at the end of this year. There is some speculation he may want to go and join a European club in preparation for next summer's International World Cup, or that maybe even a move back to Argentina, particularly with Newell's Old Boys, his team that he played for and supported when he was very young, may appeal. It does sound like Messi will probably renew with the MLS side towards the end of this year, probably holding out for the best contract he can get. Who would blame him, particularly considering seeing the numbers that Cristiano Ronaldo will be earning at Al Nassr following his renewal of contract with them. Astonishing numbers that we covered on our Money in Football podcast on Tuesday on Patreon. The problem for the MLS clubs is obviously there's a salary structure in play where you can only have a certain number of players earn over a certain amount. The disparity between what Messi will earn and many of his teammates is obviously absolutely massive. Compare that structure, which obviously creates a really good competitive nature to the league in MLS, but obviously offers that league restriction in terms of targets to be one of the biggest leagues in world football. For, say, the clubs in Saudi Arabia at the moment, those restrictions obviously don't operate in the same way. For the MLS clubs, it's great that there's a competitive nature to the league, but while there is salary caps in place, there will always be a restriction in terms of what these clubs can achieve. Quite often with these clubs as well, they are going to attract top attacking players where they can, such as Messi. Think of other global superstars that have gone and played in that league, likes of, say, David Beckham, Zlatan Ibrahimovic. you generally, if you're going to have players that can earn above a salary cap, you probably are in most cases going to go and attack the attacking players. So still a lot of work, I think, for the MLS to do for them to feel like they can catch up. And while that salary cap is in play, it's difficult to foresee that an MLS club would ever perform particularly well in a tournament such as this. I really enjoyed Flamengo against Bayern Munich. I think there was a little bit of an inkling. Obviously, we'd seen Flamengo do really well against Chelsea, that they could definitely trouble the Germans. However, 10 minutes in, it certainly felt like the game was over with Bayern already winning 2-0. But full credit to the Brazilians. They stuck at it. They really wanted to press and had a real intent, similar to the Chelsea game. And there was certainly a period in the second half at 3-2 where there was a little bit of nervousness for Bayern Munich, I think, because the Brazilians were really at it and trying everything they could, following Jorginho had reduced the two-goal deficit to one with a penalty in the second half. But Harry Kane's two goals would provide crucial for Bayern Munich. The second, he has this brilliant knack. You've seen this goal from Kane so many times where his first touch is perfect and in front of him that he can just wrap his foot and choose which corner he wants to go to finish. A brilliant second goal. And the first he got, which was Bayern's second, when he managed to ride away from the tackle, even though he's 25 yards out. I always used to say this about Kane, just shoot. Just shoot. Even on his weaker foot, his technique in terms of striking, even on his weaker foot, is so strong that you'd fancy him. Given a sight a goal, if he's got time to show, really fancy him. His technique with his left foot is better than many players with his right in terms of actual shooting ability. And yes, the deflection certainly helped somewhat, but it was still a very good strike, and no surprise to see it end up in the net. Kane suffered a really brutal kind of tackle from Eric Pulgar from Flamengo. The Brazilian player, or the team for the Brazilian team, ended up in a far worse state. He had to be stretchered off. Although Kane, no saint himself, also was booked in the second half for a very, very crude tackle of his own. My assessment on Bayern Munich at the moment is that they're a little bit off the likes of PSG, and I would fancy PSG to beat them. One thing that would certainly help is if they can get Jamal Musiala into the team. He missed a large chunk of the back end of last season due to injury, and I just feel that that trio of Sane, Gnabry, and Michael Olise are all really good players, but don't have a little bit more of the subtlety that, say, Musiala will have with some of his play. I think he links really well with Kane. Now, he's obviously not been fully fit, but I think having come on and scored a hat-trick in Bayern's handsome opening game victory against Auckland City would have probably been hoped to be back in the team by this point. Whether they're better off still using him as an impact substitute or whether they can get him into the team to start with for that game tomorrow, not in the know, but I think Bayern would certainly be better off getting him back in the team. I would expect them to be beaten by PSG personally. I watched Fluminense's victory against Inter Milan. Renato Garcho's side switched to a back five, which I think certainly caused some confusion for Inter. And the Brazilians did really well in this game. They won through goals from German Cano, and Hercules got the second. John Arias, who's been highlighted by many people in this tournament, outstanding, very unlucky not to score in this one again. But much of the fallout story about Inter Milan, well beaten by Paris Saint-Germain, obviously in the Champions League final, there's been lots of talk about them becoming an ageing squad and how would they develop moving on from obviously the absence of manager Filippo Inzaghi, who's obviously gone to Al Hilal. They were well beaten, though certainly tried their hardest to get an equaliser. And Lautaro Martinez was very unlucky. In fact, it was probably the game that featured probably my favourite minute that I'd seen in the tournament so far, where Martinez had an effort that was well saved, and Fluminense went on a great break. Then that was double countered on a second transition, and Martinez had ended up having an effort that hit the inside of the post and came out and rolled across the line behind Fluminense's 44-year-old goalkeeper. Martinez didn't mince his words afterwards. He said, "We need top mentality or players leave." Not happy, clearly frustrated with some of his teammates. And the one thing you'd have to acknowledge about Martinez is he gives it everything on the pitch and is a clear talisman for Inter. I know he got a lot of stick during the 2022 World Cup, but I actually read that he was injured, carrying a problem going into that tournament. He's been a great servant for Inter Milan and obviously wants to establish Inter as one of the biggest sides in Europe that's competing for the top honours. Much of this has come back about in terms of links of Hakan Calhanoglu has been linked with a move back to Turkey. Calhanoglu in response said those are words that hit hard, words that divide, not unite. And that message, I think, was posted on Instagram, was liked by Martinez forward teammate Marcus Thuram. Yeah, not always well at Inter Milan at the moment. Manchester City's game at Al Hilal kicked off at 2 o'clock in the morning UK time, so it wasn't one to be watched by myself. However, you can imagine the shock and the rubbing of my eyes when I looked at my phone the next morning and saw that Al Hilal had won 4-3 in extra time. There were some crazy statistics from this game. There were 15 big chances in all. Al Hilal had 8 of them, City 7, and 47 shots in total. City had 30, Al Hilal 17. It appears I missed a cracker. And the impact of this on Saudi Arabian football is obviously huge. Although I would note that there wasn't too much build after of Saudi Arabia's victory against Argentina in the last World Cup. It feels like one of them. It was, that was a shock, but it was forgotten about. What did it mean for Saudi Arabian football going forward? Now, this might have a slightly different consequence because Al Hilal now go into their quarter-final tonight with Fluminense as favourites and every chance, realistically, of potentially making the final. And perhaps we shouldn't be so shocked. Remember, Al Hilal were drawn with Real Madrid in the group stage and conducted themselves well. They were value for that draw, and they were value for what they achieved in this one as well. And remember as well, no Alexander Mitrovic for Al Hilal, and they were also without also star forward Salim Al Dawsari, who scored that winning goal for Saudi Arabia against Argentina. A brilliant result and will give some validation to many of the players who have gone out there, Saudi Arabia, accused of doing it just for money. If there can be consequence of glory and victory afterwards, it will justify the means for many players. I read something interesting from Ruben Neves, who'd obviously played for them, played in a sweeper position actually, who'd obviously joined them from Wolves. And he was very open and said, yes, the money has been a very big part of joining Saudi Arabian football, but he wants to be successful. And Al Hilal were the biggest club in Saudi Arabia. You can see they've been very well supported at this tournament. So probably what happens next to be more important to Al Hilal, because if they can beat Fluminense and get to the semi-final, that has to take serious note for people. So it's a story for them and their investment that people will want to get behind from there. The impact on City, concerning a little bit. There was one before I talk about it. It was one interesting moment in the game after City had gone ahead 1-0. Al Hilal had refused to kick off for several minutes, having seen a replay of the incident that led to Bernardo Silva's goal on the big screen, where it clearly did hit Ait-Nouri's arm, but I would say it wasn't intentional. And Al Hilal for a couple of minutes refused to restart. The referee actually had to announce, as if it was a VAR decision, the reason for why he was given the goal. The game swung in different ways. So Al Hilal scored quickly twice early in the second half before Erling Haaland had equalised for Manchester City. Literally from the kickoff, Malcolm won a penalty for Al Hilal, but it was overturned because of an offside decision. And City showed all the old traits of vulnerability from the highlights I've seen. Very concerning. Perhaps in hindsight, we should reflect on the outstanding performance against Juventus and realise it was a game that didn't have consequence. I spoke about this a little bit last week. The worst case scenario for Juventus was that they would finish second in the group. It didn't have consequence. Here for City, they suffered under the consequence and also suffered, I think, by not having Rodri start the game. And Rodri, worryingly, who came on as a substitute, also had to be replaced later in the game. Rodri did come on with City losing and they did make it to extra time. Clearly going to be a better side with him. Let's hope that setback is not too bad for him. The impact on City will be reaching. In the sense, the Juventus games had people like me questioning, right, the fluidity in City's team, but the vulnerabilities, as I said, still exist there. A few interesting stats for City which won't please fantasy managers. The good news is obviously that they're returning earlier, so I presume they will probably arrange some pre-season friendlies now before the start of game week 1. But some interesting statistics. Only Ederson, Jeremy Doku and Savinho featured in over 70% of Manchester City's minutes across the 4 games. Many of you will have noted that Phil Foden scored 3 goals, including an absolutely outstanding equaliser here in extra time of this one to make it 3-3. But those 3 goals have come in only 149 minutes. Foden has started only once. And actually, across City's 4 games, 24 different players have started. And you also have to factor in the likes of Jack Grealish, technically is still registered with the club. James McAtee was also with England under 21s. City's squad is bloated. Pep Guardiola likes to operate quite a smaller squad, something that many of us have criticised. But there will definitely be some departures for City, I think, before the end of the transfer window. Real Madrid beat Juventus 1-0. Goal coming from 21-year-old Gonzalo Garcia, who's been standing in for Kylian Mbappe. Mbappe did make an appearance as a substitute, and I presume would probably be ready to start the quarter-final. Though it would be harsh on Garcia, who took his goal extremely well. It was assisted by Trent Alexander-Arnold with his first kind of big moment for Real Madrid. Trent played right wing back. I don't like him there. I've spoken about that a lot. I think there are huge differences to playing wing back and playing full back. First is Trent is a player that likes to see the game. Playing at wing back, you have to start at a higher position. Quite often you're receiving. Also for Trent, he's used to having someone in front of him. Normally, obviously at Liverpool, Mohamed Salah. It's a really different makeup and structure for Trent. Trent's a player who I think likes to arrive onto the ball. Like I say, see what's happening. Trent is not going to hit the touchline and start beating players on the outside. That's not his game. His biggest quality, of course, is his crossing and amazing distribution. Trent's a great footballer. As a winger, I don't like. I think Trent needs help on that side, and I'm a little bit concerned about him playing in that position in the longer term. Though it should be noted, a key point of this game was Marcos Alonso's tactical tweak. Now, we know at Leverkusen, he generally, particularly in the title-winning season, very much favoured a back three. But Juventus had started well in this game. Kenan Yildiz was picking up some terrific positions in left half spaces and managed to feed one particular through ball through to Kolo Muani, who was unlucky, although arguably should have scored, with a dink that landed on the top of the net. Juventus were particularly threatening in the early stages. Yildiz had another really nice effort that deflected ever so narrowly wide at 0-0. What Madrid did differently to change it, or at least what Alonso did tactically, was move Tchouaméni from central centre-back position to go and follow Yildiz into midfield, and then they began to build in more of a back four structure, though with the wing back still particularly high, so rather more like a back two layer. But Tchouaméni was then able to help with midfield, which then enabled others to push further up and get closer to Garcia, and it gave Madrid a much stronger structure without the ball, where Tchouaméni was close and stopped Yildiz from playing and being so impactful in the game. What's clear to me from what I saw here is it's an outstanding tactical tweak from the manager. But the essence, I think, for Real Madrid is getting back towards being a team. I think that's something Alonso really wants. There's been this kind of aura about them recently that become a little bit more like the Galacticos again, with the likes of Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. At the moment, there are consequences in their press that aren't quite right. Vinicius Jr., I saw, for example, working really hard to go and press against centre-backs, but often wasn't joined by those behind him. Now, it could be that he's pressing at the wrong time or others aren't following. And again, this is something that will change, but I think Madrid are going to work under a far stricter structure in terms of how they are tactically. That will benefit them. Some won't make it. Some might fall by the wayside here under Marcos Alonso, because I think he's going to have tactical flexibility. He's going to have real demands on his players in terms of the work they put in. Some are going to have to show more for Real Madrid. They're still very capable of winning this, though, no doubt about it. They'll face Dortmund in the quarterfinals. Unfortunately, Joe Bellingham is suspended, so won't face off against his brother. Picked up a booking midway through the first half in this one in Atlanta. Sergio Ramos very nearly equalised for Monterrey, which obviously would have given him the chance to play against his old club. Interestingly, Dortmund had 4 first half big chances in this one, but only 6 shots in total. Sergio Guirassy scored both for Dortmund, 2 outstanding finishes in the first half. But Monterrey give Dortmund quite a bit of a fight in the second half and acquitted themselves very well. One notable incident from this match, unfortunately, Monterrey supporters were warned on the big screens and over the tannoy in the stadium about a homophobic chant that was being aimed when Dortmund's goalkeeper Kobel was taking goal kicks. The quarterfinals are next. They'll start with Fluminense against Al Hilal tonight in the Orlando Camping World Stadium before Chelsea in the middle of the night face Palmeiras. I may try and avoid this score and watch it in the morning. That's at Philadelphia's Lincoln Financial Field. The game in Atalanta between Paris Saint-Germain and Bayern Munich is at 5 p.m. UK time tomorrow before Real Madrid will face Dortmund in the final game at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey on Saturday night. And from that game, the semi-finals and the final are both played at MetLife Stadium. Now, the semi-finals and the final will be taking place at 3 p.m. local time, hottest time of the day. And this is where FIFA Pro are really making noises at the moment about trying to scrap the 12 p.m. kickoff and ideally also these 3 p.m. local time kickoffs as well. The problem is, in terms of lessons learned for the International World Cup, is what's FIFA's priority? Well, FIFA's priority is exposure. Why are the semi-finals and the final kicking off at 3 p.m. local time rather than at night in America? Well, it would be, say, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning here in the UK and the majority of Europe. And there's also an impact in terms of the viewing figures that you may get from Asia as well. And there's too much, in my opinion, focus away from the players and what the quality of the football should be in terms of suiting and catering to people's demands. These games, semi-finals and a final, should be happening at night. It's believed the intention for the FIFA International World Cup final next summer, which is also likely to be played at MetLife Stadium, is also likely to be at 3 p.m. local time. The game should be happening at night. That's where you'll get a far better quality of football. We are taking something away here, in my opinion, in terms of what the players can provide. We know we're going to have water breaks, etc. And you may still need them for a nighttime game as well. But football at the night time would be a little bit easier for some of these players. FIFA Pro believe that football should not be played above 28 degrees. Many of these games have certainly happened at temperatures well above that. We've seen examples such as Borussia Dortmund, for example, even sending their substitutes to watch the game in the dressing room rather than be out in the sunshine. I don't think FIFA will budge on it next summer because for them, the priority is still the exposure and the amount of viewing figures they can get, which is better for sponsorships, etc., etc. We can still expect games to kick off at 12 p.m. local time in the International World Cup. I wouldn't even rule out morning games potentially being played at maybe even 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, whilst FIFA have organised their schedule in terms of what games are going to be played where, the order is not quite locked into place yet, and neither are kickoff times. There is certain benefits to stadiums like Atlanta's stadium. The Mercedes-Benz stadium is obviously closed in. They can close the roof, and the stadium is fully air conditioned. If you're going to have afternoon games, have them places like there. However, people will then also counter that and reflect on, say, the attendance when Chelsea and Los Angeles played each other. I believe it was on a Monday afternoon, and the attendance really suffered because of the early kickoff time, which I think that was a 12 p.m. local time kickoff. But as also said, it's only MetLife Stadium at the moment that has had a weather delayed game for a stadium that will actually be used next summer. The majority of this tournament has been played on the East Coast. We'll also see games obviously played on the West Coast next year, and there's obviously going to be games played in Canada and Mexico as well. Mexico also could obviously have some extremely hot conditions. Those who've got memories of 1970 and 1986 will remember that particularly well. So I don't think FIFA are going to change anything, unfortunately. So next year we can expect further weather delays potentially. Excuse me. And football matches played in temperatures which are too hot. I've spoken particularly on some of our Patreon podcasts over the last year of my belief that I think the 2030 International World Cup may well be the last international tournament held in summer. And it wouldn't surprise me if this tournament in the future became a winter event as well. These are the most glamorous ties in terms of FIFA and what they believe they can expose to the general public. If they can have their tournament played in the winter, such as the tournament in Qatar, the product in Qatar, you may not like that it was there, but the quality of the football definitely benefited from the fact that it was played in winter. I think we could all largely agree with that. The European Championships last year in Germany in summer and not the worst conditions in terms of heat, for me, wasn't a great tournament. A lot of these players are fatigued. The only thing I think will change it, by the way, in terms of the football calendar, which is way too condensed now for many of the top players, is either some form of law that restricts them to say a maximum amount of football matches in a season, whether that's 50, 55 or so. Well, the only other thing that will change it particularly is a strike. And I think if that happens, it has to come from everyone globally. Now we can look at the top clubs in Europe and say, well, yeah, okay, maybe strike, but football transcends much further, and in lower leagues, etc., and other countries around the world might not be a need to strike, right? But I think it possibly needs that, and I think it might be something that becomes a discussion over the next couple of years. By the way, on the next Club World Cup, Qatar have registered interest in hosting it in 2029. If that happens, you can expect that to be in the winter. On Monday, I'll be covering off the quarterfinals from the weekend. I'll try and watch as much as I can. I'll certainly watch the game tonight between Fluminense and Al Hilal. I'm looking forward to that. I think Chelsea will certainly feel at this stage that they should very much be making the final, but particularly if they play Al Hilal, that will be no easy tie. Al Hilal have some very, very good players and are well coached, obviously, under Inzaghi, and interesting to see him tweak that to more of kind of an Inter Milan back three structure, as said, with Ruben Neves dropping in for that game against Manchester City. And Al Hilal will know now, having beaten City, that they've got every chance potentially of reaching the final. And I wouldn't be surprised necessarily if they do so. Again, if Chelsea have to play, it'll be 3 o'clock local time against Al Hilal. They may well find that a tough game. And I don't think they'd find it necessarily easy against the Brazilians of Fluminense either. I would expect Paris Saint-Germain to reach the final from here. I think they'll have too much for Bayern Munich. And I think they will dominate too much against Real Madrid that will make it very difficult for them off the ball. That's obviously if Madrid beat Dortmund, which they should, but don't rule out Alonso coming up with something tactical to try and nullify what Enrique's PSG would potentially do if those two sides meet. If that's the case, we'll preview it and talk about it a little bit more on Monday's podcast. Obviously, Ask James was scheduled to be at 12 p.m. UK time today. It will be the same time now for you tomorrow on Saturday. So please feel free to join me for that live stream tomorrow. Please remember as well that for many of the players competing in these quarterfinals, as I said earlier, many of them will have been friends with Jota. Many of them have been teammates with him. So it will be an emotional weekend for many of these players. That's all for the Club World Cup at the moment. Cue music, please. Match up.